Good morning and welcome to the fourth meeting of the City of Edinburgh Council Portobello-Park Bill Committee. Can I ask everyone to please switch off their mobile phones as we're now in session? Before dealing with the business before the committee today, I would like to comment on a letter in which the committee members have received from one of the objectors, whose objection was rejected by the committee at the preliminary stage on the grounds that the committee did not feel that the objector's interests were clearly adversely affected. The objector has asked that the committee reconsider and reinstate the 7 objections which were rejected. In the terms of the Parliament Standing Orders, Rule 9A.8.2, private bill committees are required to give preliminary consideration to all admissible objections and to reject any objection where the objector's interests are, in the opinion of the committee, not clearly adversely affected by the bill. I can confirm that in fulfilling this part of the process, in relation to the Portobello-Park Bill, the committee considered each of the 66 objections individually. Factors such as whether the objector lived in the immediate vicinity and used the park, did not live in the immediate vicinity but within the City of Edinburgh boundary and used the park, as well as where they lived out with Edinburgh, were taken into account. In reaching its decision on each, the committee had regard to the particular facts and circumstances of each objection. This involved a judgment about the degree in which there was a clear adverse effect and whether that effect on the objector's interest was sufficient for the objection to be continued to be consideration stage if the bill proceeds to that stage. Having taken evidence, I am satisfied that there is nothing in the letter that would justify revisiting the committee's decision that the objector's interests are not clearly adversely affected by the bill, and I propose to write to inform the objector accordingly. If members are content with that, I will arrange for the correspondence to be published in due course. Are members content? Yep. Thank you very much. Item 1 on the agenda today relates to the committee making a decision to take items in private. The committee should decide whether to take item 3 and consideration of its next steps in the scrutiny of the bill at preliminary stage in private. Are members agreed? Okay. And the committee should also decide whether its consideration of the main themes and issues arising from evidence to inform its draft report and consideration of its draft preliminary stage report be taken in private at future meetings. Are members agreed? Okay, thank you. I would like to invite the witnesses to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Peters.
Sorry, Alison Connolly.
My name is Stephen Hawkins.
My name is Roy Martin. I'm a Queen's Counsel and I'm instructed to appear with the group in the event that I can assist the committee with any legal questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, before we begin, I'd just like to remind witnesses that the question at this stage will focus broadly on issues relating to the general principles and whether the bill should proceed as a private bill. If anyone has an opening statement, if you could make that now and up to 10 minutes, please.
Okay. Good morning and thank you for inviting us to give evidence on the general principles of the bill. We shall be covering the legality of the bill, the consultation of the private bill and the alternative sites. You will have seen the timeline of events we submitted with our original objection, but we would like to remind you of a few key points. The Council announced its intention to build 2 schools and a substantial amount of housing on Portobello-Park and Golf Course in early 2006. Initially, the Council disagreed that Portobello-Park was common good land, only acknowledging its inalienable common good status in January 2008. Soon after, the Council announced its intention to go to court to seek permission to build on the park. However, they then changed tack and obtained a legal opinion to say they did not need the permission of the courts, and in December of that year, based on that advice, decided to give Portobello High School priority over other schools that were scheduled for replacement. We made it clear to the Council at that point that we would challenge this decision and made 2 offers to go to court jointly with them to resolve the legal issues, both of which were declined. Following the Council awarding themselves planning permission in February 2011, we lodged the judicial review and the Court of Session ruled in 2012 that Portobello-Park could not be built on. Accordingly, it is the actions of the Council that have allowed the timescales to slip. Had they gone to court in 2008, the new school could have been built by now. The private bill is now being promoted as a means of helping to get the Council out of the impasse it has reached over the replacement of Portobello High School. The City of Edinburgh Council chose not to seek early resolution of the legal issues and only pursue one option, and this is the reason they have a problem with the delivery of this school now. Clearly, urgency has not always been top of their agenda. Looking at the legality of the bill, We would draw your attention to Part 5, paragraph 5.8 of the Parliamentary Procedures on Private Bills, which says that a bill should not proceed as a private bill if the result sought would be more appropriately achieved by means of changes to the general public law, i.e. by a public rather than a private bill, that would give the same powers or benefits to others in a similar position without the need to single out the promoter. This is the first ever private bill promoted to overcome an unequivocal and categorical ruling from the courts. This is a matter of the principles of the Parliament, not just a legal issue. This is a legacy. For the Parliament to be willing to consider the private bill, it must be satisfied that the private bill procedure is the correct way to consider the issues. As well as the legal opinion of Roy Martin QC, there is recognition in the other legal opinions submitted in evidence that this is a wider issue, not just an isolated case, and would be better dealt with by substantive legislation. Despite the City of Edinburgh Council's public assertion that the pursuit of the private bill is purely a local matter, privately they agree that this has significance which goes beyond Portobello, beyond Edinburgh, as a letter from City of Edinburgh Council dated 9th of October 2012 to John Swinney makes clear, saying that whilst this request is being made on behalf of the City of Edinburgh Council, we are sure that this matter will be of interest to other local authorities. In other words, this issue is of national importance, and the bill could have wider repercussions for the use and misuse of common good land. We would argue that the issue should be addressed as a public bill so that the process and safeguards for common good on a national basis are properly examined and considered, rather than a piecemeal approach which could set an unwelcome precedent for all common good land. The wider implications of this bill have been recognised by other objectors from within and out with Edinburgh, but unfortunately their objections have been excluded, shutting them out from contributing to and informing the democratic process, despite the fact that this bill could affect common good land all over Scotland. A private bill should only be used where there are no other options available to achieve the objective, in this case to provide a new school. There are suitable alternative sites for the school, which I will cover later. Looking at the consultation, the private bill guidance states in paragraph 2.24 that the private bill committee will wish to satisfy itself that the promoter undertook a consultation process that was open, accessible, helpful, clearly timetabled, and where possible adopted and demonstrated innovative and best practice. We do not believe that the consultation carried out by the City of Edinburgh Council adequately meets these criteria, and therefore it cannot be relied upon with any confidence. The consultation was designed to promote the preferred option. It lacked balance and included questions about usage of the proposed replacement park space, which is not part of the bill. The information provided was a sales pitch by the promoter for a school on the park, as opposed to being about the private bill. The timing over the festive period effectively made it a 6-week consultation, when consultations for private bills usually last 12 weeks. Distribution problems meant a significant number of people living closest to the park only received consultation material 5 weeks into the process. Information was not equally accessible by all. For example, forms were not distributed with a leaflet, so those without internet access were at a disadvantage. The targeted area was virtually identical to the school catchment, even though it was presented as an Edinburgh-wide exercise. The information presented and the language used were biased, flawed and misleading. For example, does this affect other parks and open spaces? To which the answer was, no, absolutely not. This bill will only apply to the site in Portobello. No mention of the strong legal view on precedence. Surgery sessions fell under the radar of many. I have children in one of the feeder primaries, I live in the vicinity, and yet I knew nothing of these surgeries. It was heavily weighted towards the school community, as special efforts were made to engage them through visits to the school, stalls and playgrounds, emails sent to parents on school mailing lists. Setting no minimum age for the consultation had a clear objective: tell 1,300 children and parents that this is the quickest, cheapest way to a new school with no other site in a good location that can offer the same facilities, and the potential outcome is obvious. If the quality of the consultation is poor, the outcome means very little. Only around 2% of Edinburgh population took part in the consultation, so it's very misleading to say that 76% of people are in favour of the bill. It was made very clear at the time by the Council that this was not a referendum or vote. Looking at the alternative sites, the alternative options have never been presented in a balanced way, very much described as poor and inferior substitutes for the ultimate prize of the park site. The Council are investing everything in the bill, and the proposed twin-track approach has disappeared without trace. There has been no progress with other site options, and the delay continues. The inconsistency of the Council's approach to school replacement is illustrated by the fact 2 other secondary schools currently being replaced, Boroughmuir and James Gillespie's, are both being rebuilt on brownfield sites, which are proportionately much smaller than either of the 2 leading alternative sites for Portobello High School. Boroughmuir, with a school roll of 1,150, will be built on a new 1-hectare site, part of a much larger ex-industrial site, and Gillespie's with a similar roll on its current site of 2 hectares. Portobello High School's current site and the Baileyfield option site are both 3 hectares for a potential school roll of 1,400, yet they have been branded too small by proponents of building on the park. Either of these sites would be able to accommodate 1 full-sized pitch in line with the pitch provision in many other city high schools. Can it really be justified to lose a whole park, 6.4 hectares, for the marginal benefit of 1 extra pitch on the park site? The fact is, there are other means of delivering this school with the same standard of educational facilities, and for all of the above reasons, the bill should not proceed any further.
Thank you very much. We'll now head to questions from members, and I would like to begin with something that you've said in your opening statement, but also that was referred to in the written evidence that you gave, which was that the issue of the status of the park is common good land predates 2008, was something that was said in written evidence. So I was just wondering, when did PPAG take the view that the land was common good land, and on what basis was that decision made?
Right from the early days in 2006, the group had identified... Sorry, do you want me to start again?
Yes, please.
From the original announcement in January 2006 that the Council intended to build on Portobello-Park, Portobello-Park Action Group formed and took advice, and very early on, so in spring 2006, came to the view that it was common good land and obtained a legal opinion from Mr Martin to that effect, so it may be helpful for him to...
Okay, Mr Martin.
Yes, Madam, I have the opinion here, in fact, if the committee wished to see it, but I was instructed to give an opinion on whether or not the park was common good land, and I gave an opinion that it was. I could give you the date of that opinion, but it certainly was in 2006.
2006. We have your written submission as evidence. We just wanted to know the dates for that and clarification.
Could I just...
Mr Hawkins, yes.
Yes, thank you. In April 2006, there was a public meeting at St Mark's in Portobello, at which point the councillors involved in it at that point, Ian Perry and Ewan Aitken, were warned and were told that our opinion was that it's common good land. It belonged to the people of Edinburgh. It wasn't for the council to do what it wanted to. And what came back in the way of reply from them was, oh, well, if it's common good, we won't be building on it. That obviously changed afterwards. But as early as April 2006, in a public meeting, councillors were warned of our intentions of pursuing the common good issue.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Further to that, I was wondering why PPAG is of the view that the Council should have gone to court in 2008 to settle the common good land issue.
Because of the contention, because of the fact that at the early stages the Council had said that it wasn't common good land, and then that it was common good land, but they didn't think court permission was necessary, we asked them if we could clarify the matter by going to court with that question.
Okay, so that would be the reason that you wanted the Council to go to court?
We wanted clarification once and for all, and the only way that we could envisage that being obtained was by asking the courts.
Okay, thank you. Mr Martin?
Madam, I wonder if I might just assist on that. There is a procedure whereby, if a matter of law is in dispute, the Court of Session can give a ruling on it. There's either a single judge, which is a summary trial, or a special case which is before 3 appeal court judges, and that was what was suggested on my advice to the council as a way of resolving the dispute at an earlier stage. There was also my advice was that if that procedure was adopted, there would be a sharing of costs. Okay. In other words, it wouldn't, in a sense, be a traditional litigation with somebody pursuing and somebody defending. It would be two parties bringing the issue to the court, presenting their competing arguments and accepting the decision of the court.
Okay, thank you very much. Further to that, again, in the written evidence, and I quote PPAC, again, PPAC argues that it's widely acknowledged that the project of reprovising Portobello High School has been catastrophically mismanaged by the City of Edinburgh Council from the start. So I'm just wondering what you mean by mismanagement in that. Mr Hawkins.
All right. I think the idea of mismanagement comes from the point of view that the council, for instance, maintained for 2 years that it wasn't common good land, and then suddenly flipped that decision with no clear announcement. It was discovered in a paper going to the Finance Committee. So having maintained for 2 years that it wasn't common good, and then deciding it was, they could have perhaps considered that 2 years earlier and started a management process that accepted it was common good, and what are we going to do with it? How are we going to deal with this? But they delayed 2 years there. Having then decided that it was common good, Marilyn McLaren, the convener of the Children and Families Committee, announced that she was going to go to court, as Roy Martin has indicated, to get clarification on this. Then we would have all known where we stood in 2008. And in fact, we have presented as evidence a letter to one of our supporters from Marilyn McLaren at the beginning of, I think it was February 2008, saying that they will be going to court, that is, the council will be going to court to clarify it. After that, what happened was that a legal opinion was obtained by the council, which indicated that the council could do what it wanted with this piece of land. Now, our contention at that point was, yes, fine, you've got an opinion. There's probably many opinions. As you've seen, there are several legal opinions presented to you in the way of evidence that you've called for. What we were saying was that, yes, you've got an opinion, but there's no decision. Let's go together to test that. But the council refused to, hanging on to that piece of paper like Chamberlain hanged on to the piece of paper at Munich. They were saying, we've got this piece of evidence, we can do what we want. Rather than managing it at that time, recognising the risk and managing the risk of this process. So all the way through that. One of the things as well that they did was, in 2006, promise that there would be replacement open space. Then they reneged on that, they overturned that. Then now, suddenly, it's reappeared as that, the promise of replacement open space. So in that process, the management of how they were going to compensate for the loss of the common good has been mismanaged, in that they said, yes, we'll compensate, no, we won't, it's in the wrong place, it's the waste of public money, but now it isn't. So it's how they've flipped through the whole of this process with no clear management guidance as to how to get a new school delivered as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. Just finally for myself, in oral evidence heard on the 11th of September from the City of Edinburgh Council, we heard that, and again I'll quote if you don't mind, the purpose of section 2 of the bill is to ensure that the recreation powers remain available for the park and that the position could be put beyond doubt by means of a suitable technical amendment. It was also confirmed that the site would remain inalienable common good land following any appropriation. Do you have any further comments on the Council's assertions regarding the status of the land? Mr Hawkins?
I think Roy Martin is probably the best person to comment on that.
Okay, Mr
Yes,
Martin.
thank you, Madam. I have actually read that evidence. I find it slightly difficult to understand, I must confess. I don't think it is a situation where a suitable amendment could not resolve an issue. So I start by accepting that. But it's slightly unclear, and I have to say, during the court proceedings at various points, it was also unclear what the council thought would be the status of the land upon which they were building the school, assuming they overcame the hurdles to do that. And the answer that you've referred to might be read as suggesting that despite there being a school built on the land, it would remain common good land. Now, of course, the alternative is the fact that the remainder of the park, by and large the golf course, is not affected by the bill and therefore will remain as inalienable common good land. But I'm sorry if I can't help the committee much further, but I think there's an uncertainty here as to what the council actually thinks will be the status of the land to which the bill applies, and assuming they appropriate and build the school. Because my legal view would be, and my opinion was really to this effect, it will cease to be common good land. Now, as I've already said, conditions could be imposed, amendments could be provided which limit what can be done with it. I don't dispute that. But I'm sorry if my answer has been less than helpful, but it does seem to me to raise a slight concern in my own mind that the council are not absolutely sure themselves what will be the status of that land as and when the bill is passed, if it is passed.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. That's a question for me. If I can pass to my colleague, Alison McInnes.
Much, Convener, and good morning. The memorandum that accompanies the bill sets out the alternative legal approaches to address the legal obstacle, and Ms Peters in her opening remarks suggested that it would be more appropriate to pursue this as a public bill. I wonder if PPAG could elaborate on their views on the alternative legal approaches to the change in the park status which were considered by the Council.
I'd like to ask Mr Martin to answer that, please.
I think, putting it shortly, and I can address them individually if the committee would want me to, the alternatives of an appeal to the Supreme Court, I suppose I might say that, but I would regard that as not being an option that should have been pursued. So I agree that that was not a prospect that had any success. There was the suggestion that the Council would, at the stage that they had reached after 2012, would decide, after all, that the land was not common good land. Now, I think that would have been considerably fraught with considerable difficulty for them, so it would not have been something I would have advised. There was the possibility of a petition to the Nobile Officium, which is a petition to the Court of Session to exercise, as it were, a sort of general power. I agree that that would not have been likely to succeed, and I would not have advised it. So they were in effect left, assuming they wanted to pursue the use of the park, with a bill such as the present one, or alternatively, a public bill to change the law which was the problem. And if I may, at this stage, be forgiven for just saying, this seems to me, from a legal perspective, one of the critical issues. It has already been referred to in the group's submissions, and they, of course, speak as advocates for their cause. I simply, as best I can, take a legal view. There is undoubtedly an issue that Section 75, subsection 2 of the Local Government Act prevents appropriation. That is what of inalienable common good land. That is what the Court of Session has found. That is to be contrasted with the fact that Section 75, subsection 2 does allow disposal with the consent either of the Sheriff or the Court of Session. And on the face of it, that seems to be something of an anomaly, because in each case, the land ceases to be common good land. Why should it be different? Now, Professor Robert Rennie, at paragraph 6.1f of the written submission he has made to the committee, has recognised, I think, that this is a general issue. And that, if I may say, is why the committee has an understandable difficulty over objectors from elsewhere and so on, because there is this larger issue. And in other words, the answer to this would be a change in Section 75, which would be a general amendment applying throughout Scotland. And of course, if there were public legislation of that sort, it would allow all of the interested parties throughout the country to have a view on it. Now, the only reason it appears to me why that has not been done is because of the difficulty the Council have found themselves in as at 2012. And I make no comment on that. These are matters for submission for those who are instructing me. But the fact is, if you leave that out of account, I would have thought, even on the committee's own advice, that's to say from Professor Rennie and elsewhere, the appropriate way to deal with this would be for legislation to amend Section 75, subsection 2. Finally, if I may say in that context, it is said, and has certainly been said, well, appropriation is a lesser, as it were, step than disposal. So why should it be absolutely prohibited, but disposal be permitted with the consent of the court? All I would say from a legal point of view is I'm not sure that is absolutely the case, because often disposal comes about because the land has simply ceased to be used for any common good purpose. In other words, it's just lying there wasted and no doubt incurring some cost on the part of the local authority who have to maintain it. And I've certainly been involved in these matters. I was involved in a case regarding a village, or a town hall it was in fact, to be taken out of the common good. And it was derelict, and there were arguments about that. That is often where disposal will come about. Appropriation is different. In a sense, it's driven by the council wanting the land for something else. And therefore the council's first, when I say the council, forgive me, I should say local authority, I mean this objectively. The local authority want the land for something else. Now, it may be a perfectly justifiable, in this case I don't think there's any doubt, it's a very justifiable cause, a new high school. But the fact is the council doesn't own common good land, as it were, in the way that it owns all of the other land. It has the trustee duties in effect. They're not strictly as trustee, but they have to look after it for the community. The community, in a sense, owns it, although the council is the title holder. So, forgive me, this was a rather long answer to your question. I do apologise. It seems to me the proceeding with legislative reform was probably the only option the council had. If it hadn't been for time pressure, I would see every good reason for a public bill to amend Section 75, subsection 2. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. That was helpful.
Just add a couple of things. From a layman's point of view, I think that the time pressure, the council having gone down one route and one route only, the time pressure is playing hard on them. And that this is, the phrase last throw of the dice has been used for the council. I just wish they'd stop gambling with the future of the Portobello High School. But from the group's point of view, the issues being aired in court and decided in court was something that we were looking for all the way along. And as has been said, there isn't the way, as there would be for disposal, for it to be considered by the court. But we were looking for other ways of progressing this matter by going to court and getting a clear decision. The other point I would like to make, though, is that the common good park has been described in quite derogatory terms at times. Now, the fact that the council has maybe, through whatever reason, not managed the park well, is no reason then for it not to be still retained within common good and to put to some other use. I think there is some case law that has brought that out in the past.
Thank you. If I might... Yes, thanks.
There has been a lot of the land use of the park, but at one of the early planning meetings, someone had said, how many, that park's never used, how many people are on it? And the response was 250 tonight. There's a football tournament on. I subsequently spoke to the father of the coach for Joppa United, and he told me that they had disbanded because they couldn't afford an alternative playing site. So the goalposts were down, the park was dug up by the council in their architectural work, and no one was allowed to use it. Requests for races on the park have been denied by the City of Edinburgh Council, And at a recent park event, we saw 200 people along at least 200 people along at the party on the park. So there is a real desire to use this park. Unfortunately, the kind of facilities that the council are suggesting might be on this replacement park have never been afforded to Portobello-Park. We have one bench, the grass. We'll be lucky if it's been cut even half a dozen times over the summer when other parks in Edinburgh are regularly cut. The grass is regularly cut.
Thank you.
Before I bring you back in, Alison, it's just I'm very conscious of the time, so if we can have short and concise answers, because we've got a number of questions and clearly the time's marching on, so the information you've given is very important and very helpful, but if we can have shorter and concise answers. Sorry, Alison.
No, that's fine, Convener. Thanks. One of the things the committee has to consider is how effective the consultation process was. Does PPAG feel that adequate focus was given to explaining the alternatives that we've just discussed and the reasons why they weren't being taken forward in the consultation material and at the public meetings as part of that consultation process?
We've provided a written coverage of our views on the consultation, so you may wish to refer to that for the detail if you want us to keep the answers short. You know, there is additional information there, but we were very disappointed in the coverage and the consultation material, and I think, as Jennifer's already mentioned, we felt that it was heavily biased towards promoting the park. It stated very clearly the park is a preferred site, and it made it clear that the view was that the alternatives were very inferior, without really giving an objective analysis of why that was the case. A lot of people in the community don't even fully understand where the other sites are. They're not aware that there are other sites. The message that the council have promoted is the park is the only option. I mean, they've put that out. The park is the way to go, and therefore people, especially parents with young children, who are led to believe that their children's education is in danger by not having a new school delivered on the park, obviously and understandably vote for that. But I think if they fully understood the alternatives available, they would be in a better position to make an informed decision.
That's fine. You've moved on to alternative sites, so I'll stay with that for the moment. What would you have wanted the council to thoroughly explain in the consultation process? Which alternative sites would you have expected them to take forward in detail?
In 2006, the council had 15 sites on the list, and they discounted most of them. Some of them for reasons such as it's green space or there's millennium planting, and there was an irony in that because Portobello-Park is both of those and wasn't discounted. So even going back to 2006 in the original feasibility study, there was an inconsistency in the approach, and we felt that the feasibility study was designed to deliver one outcome, which was Portobello-Park was the preferred site at that stage. But moving fast forward to the current position, and the council whittled it down to 3 potential options: their preferred site of the park and the existing school site and the alternative site at Baileyfield, which is on the market at the moment. The 2 sites, the fallback sites, if you like, of the existing site was considered in 2003 before any of this started, and in fact plans were drawn up for a rebuild on the existing site, and that was progressing. So there is actually a demonstrated plan of how that could be delivered, but that was really brushed under the carpet, and the message that was given in this most recent consultation was that site on its own was too small, and the school could only be delivered on that site if the neighbouring primary school was relocated. It's hard to understand how they came to that decision, and it's never been fully explained. But I think it was almost put in as an extra reason not to choose the existing site. The existing site, as it stands, is 2.9 hectares, and the neighbouring primary has 0.6 hectares. So the combined site is 3.5. But even the 2.9 site, it has been demonstrated in the past that it would be feasible to deliver a new school there. And as Jennifer's mentioned, James Gillespie's is currently being rebuilt on its existing site, which is around about 2 hectares. So the City of Edinburgh Council have proved that they can do it elsewhere in the city. So we feel that that option should have been more fully analysed, more fully discussed, rather than just, it's not really very good, we don't want to spend too much time thinking about it. And the other option, sorry,
No,
the Baileyfield option has been put up for sale. The closing date was December 2012, so 10 months ago, and we don't know the outcome of that. The council made a bid for it, but we still don't know. I think that was discussed at the meeting 2 weeks ago.
yeah. Can I just confirm then, the council, in its oral evidence to the committee, said we sought to provide at a high level the respective pros and cons of all of the different alternative sites. Do you dispute that during the consultation process?
We dispute it, yes, and we dispute the accuracy and the objectivity of the information that was given about the pros and cons.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now move to my colleague, Fiona MacLeod, please.
Can I continue with the consultation process but go into the mechanics of the process? In your objection, you refer to the late and non-delivery of leaflets. But the council said to us in evidence that respondents should generally have had 2 opportunities to be informed about the consultation process through leaflet drops, and that the level and timing of submissions to the responses was to the council. It told them that the message had got out. Is PPAG aware of any particular group of people who did not eventually receive any information at all and therefore didn't have the opportunity to respond? And does PPAG feel that the council could have done more to ensure that there was 100% coverage earlier in the process? And if so, what measures could they have taken?
Yes, there are other measures that they could have taken. For instance, they used an untried, untested delivery company. And it was only after we'd discovered that people weren't receiving leaflets that they actually accepted that their chosen method had failed. Yes, they did deliver after Christmas, but that was after the first meeting to some of the most affected areas. They're basing their assertion that their communication had been effective because they've got a high level of response fairly quickly. Now, just leading up to Christmas, many of the schools have special events, and I think that the dissemination of the information through the schools was very successful, but not to the wider area of Portobello, and certainly not to the wider area of Edinburgh.
So you've just reiterated the problems that you saw with the distribution. Can you think of any other measures the council could have used?
The measures that they used were using electronic communication, which probably cuts out quite a few people in the older age bracket in Portobello. It's not necessarily the methods, it's how they did it and when they did it.
Okay. Can I move you on then to the public meetings? Because in your submission, you said that you thought that public meetings were hostile. So could you expand on why you think that and what you think the council could have done to prevent what you characterise as hostile public meetings?
I think in the community it's very difficult at the moment to avoid the hostility that has become part of this whole debate. So if you hold a public meeting now, it's inevitable that there are very strong feelings on both sides. So I'm not sure there is very much the council could have done to prevent a public meeting being quite hostile. However, I would go back to the point that I think you're going to hear from PFANs a little bit later today, and they have worked very closely with the council in collaboration, if you like, to deliver the school in the park. And we feel that very often PFANs have been the vehicle to get a lot of drumming up of support in the community and inviting people to come along, encouraging people to come to the meeting and saying to them, you must come and you must bring your children and you must demonstrate how important it is that these children have a new school. So there was a sort of anxiety generated, and I'm not sure now, given the way the feelings are in the community, that there's very much that could be done to avoid that. But it was a hostile meeting. The outcome was there regardless of what you could do to avoid it.
Thank you, Fiona. And now moving on to my colleague James Dornan.
Thank you very much. Good morning. In your written evidence, paragraphs 4.28 and 4.29, you've argued that apart from 2 meetings at Milton Court Sheltered Housing Complex, no attempt was made to engage with those directly affected by the bill. That is the residents bordering the park and, for example, by a special meeting. Can you explain why you think that additional meetings for these residents were necessary in view of the other meetings in the general consultation process?
Could you just repeat the first bit of that, please?
Certainly. In your written submissions, paragraph 4.28 and 4.29, you argued that apart from 2 meetings at Milton Court Sheltered Housing Complex, no attempt was made to engage with those directly affected by the bill. Can you explain why you think additional meetings for these residents were necessary in view of the other meetings and the general consultation process?
I think that was in our comments because the Council had described their consultation process as including a lot of ancillary meetings, going to libraries, going to community groups, and we were unaware of any of those meetings locally. And I think it was really just to balance things out, to say that we would have liked something to try to draw people in locally, the people who perhaps weren't online and who hadn't been recipients of leaflets through their post boxes. There was no mechanism for them to know what was going on.
Okay, thank you for that.
The people most affected, you might expect, are the ones living in close proximity to the park who would use it, perhaps more than others in Portobello. They are the ones who didn't receive the leaflets until 5 weeks into the consultation after the first public meeting. Now, I believe that under the guidance, the promoter of the bill should take into account or consult closely with those most affected. And so what we're saying is that, yes, there were general meetings, but the people around the park didn't even receive their leaflets until after the Christmas, in what was a very short consultation period.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That kind of brings me on to my next point. Although the Council did appear to justify the general approach by saying that they notified those in the area, which we defined as not only the school catchment area, but geographical area set out in the Council report of November 2012, which encompassed about 14,500 households. Can PPAG expand on why they think that a citywide consultation process was necessary, and in particular what its views are on the likely costs of such a process and the risk that people with less interest in the process would have a deciding say?
I think that one of the issues is that this is Edinburgh's common good land, and that the way that the Council has approached this process has and will have bearing on how they approach other issues within the city. But the land was bought for the behoof of the people of Portobello and of the people of Edinburgh. The particular issue perhaps that we have with the way that the targeted consultation took place was that rather than saying, oh, it's Portobello's park, they said that actually the area for the targeted distribution would be more or less coterminous with the school catchment area boundary. There are 1 or 2 areas that don't exactly match up, one being an industrial estate and the other a large area of land that's greenbelt. But pretty much the consultation took place within the catchment area. So it was neither for just Portobello and neither was it for the whole of Edinburgh.
Can I ask then, how does that fit in with your argument that local residents should have been consulted in more depth, if what you're saying is that the whole of Edinburgh should have been consulted?
That comes from your own guidance. We're saying it's Portobello's, but your own guidance says that local residents should be taken into account more closely.
All your early comments suggest that the focus should have been on the local residents, except for the fact that occasionally you say.
No, I disagree with that. No, that isn't, and I hope, sorry, if we can clarify that, in that the consultation was for the people of Portobello and for the people of Edinburgh. What we're saying is that coming through from the Scottish Parliament guidance for promoters of private bills, it says that particular attention should be paid for those who are most affected. Now, you heard from Jennifer that people who might have been more closely affected were the footballers, but they'd already been kicked off the site. The other group of people are the ones around the park. Now, that comes from the guidance. That's where that comes from.
Okay, thank you. And can you expand on how you would define what you consider to be the appropriate residential area for the distribution of consultation documents?
I would suggest that as it's an Edinburgh-wide consultation, because the park was dedicated to the people of Edinburgh, then it should have been the people of Edinburgh.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take you on to the survey format and results. There's been a fair submission from the Council on this. When I say fair, I mean sizeable, fair in any other way. Does PPAG wish to provide any further information on its concerns regarding the survey process in light of the Council's clarification of their approach, or would you like me to read out what the Council's clarification of their approach is? Yeah, okay. In oral evidence, Council expanded in a number of areas in relation to the survey format and results. On services to check identification, we relied on the people who submitted information to do so honestly and openly. The only way in which we could have checked the identification of all parties would have been to write back to all 12,000 people who made submissions to ask them to confirm that, which would have been time-consuming and a disproportionately expensive process. However, we sought to identify any potential abuse of the system. All 12,000 responses were reviewed and duplicate entries were identified and removed. In addition, incomplete responses were identified and removed from consideration. Had about 5,000 responses electronically, set up an online way for people to respond. It proved popular, albeit that hard copy responses proved the most popular means of responding. Internet protocol address that identifies the computer or the system from which a response had been submitted, and we wanted to check that nobody was submitting in bulk hundreds of responses from one given computer. So we checked 5,000 responses back to individual IP addresses. Of the 3,974 valid responses, more than 3,000 came from separate IP addresses. We also undertook a process of validation back to the electoral roll. Of the 9,958 individuals who responded, 7,700 appeared in the electoral roll. Some 7,678 of those responses expressed an opinion on the bill. A number did not express an opinion. Of that total, 71.8% supported the Council's proposals, compared with 70% in the overall aggregate. Of the 7,678 responses, 5,135 were from the area and 75.9% of them were in support, which is broadly consistent with the figure in the overall population. So, further to that, do you wish to provide any further information on your concerns regarding the survey process?
We had some concerns about the lack of independence in managing the consultation, and we had asked at the outset that the Council employ somebody independent and external to run the whole thing. I think probably for financial and other reasons they chose not to do that. So we were a little bit concerned about the verification processes used to check the responses. But I think our overarching concern was that the design of the consultation in the first place invalidated those responses, because the responses were only as good as the questions that were asked and the people they were asked to, and we felt that that design was compromised right from the outset. In as much as a consultation shouldn't be about a yes-no, it should be about discussing the principles of it, and that wasn't the case. There were people standing in supermarket foyers getting yes-no ticks from customers as they left the supermarket. Do you want a new school? Tick yes. So a lot of the responses were generated in that sense, and the form itself had, do you want the school in Portobello-Park, yes or no? And then, what do you want on the replacement park? Now again, this whole issue about the replacement park is being used as an incentive, almost as a bribe, to encourage people to say, oh well, we're getting another park, they're replacing the green space, it doesn't matter. We felt that again that was inappropriate, because the replacement park, as we've mentioned elsewhere, isn't part of this bill. It's not guaranteed. It's not got any security in the future. And they're talking about spending money on a replacement park that's never been spent on Portobello-Park in the first place. It's adjacent to another park, which I think it would have been nice if we'd been able to visit on the site visit on Friday. So there were a lot of issues about the information that was in that form that we felt rendered it ineffective as a consultation document, a consultation response. And therefore, the responses themselves, in terms of the numbers, are, the meaning of them is diminished. The numbers have also been now bandied about. The 76% of people support, 76% of the community support the school and the park. Well, it's 76% of the people who responded from the local area. But that wasn't, not everybody responded. There was, I think Jennifer mentioned, 2% of the Edinburgh population as a whole responded. And I'm sure that could be broken down to say what percentage of the local community responded. But it certainly wasn't 76%. So, again, the numbers are misleading. You know what they say about statistics. So.
Okay, thank you for that very full response to a very full question. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison, you've, in your answer there, spoke about the green space, and obviously your view that it's not part of this bill that the Council are suggesting, but in evidence to us, they advise that the replacement green space at the existing school site would have fields and trust status, which is understood would mean that there would be a legal agreement with the National Playing Fields Association, which dedicates the areas concerned to public use and recreation for similar uses. Just wondering what your view is on that agreement?
Primarily, obviously we would welcome any additional green space in terms of we want green space to be preserved. However, the existing school site, by the Council's own recognition, is not in the correct location to provide a replacement for Portobello-Park. It's adjacent to an existing park, and it's a fair distance from the existing Portobello-Park. So if you had a 10-year-old child, you probably wouldn't want them going as far as that to a park. And if you've got mobility issues and you want a short walk, then you've got a long walk to get to the park before you go for a short walk. So we don't feel it's in the right location to replace Portobello-Park. Talking about the fields and trust status, obviously we would see it as a good thing, but it again can be taken away. Portobello-Park has common good status, and it's under threat, so we don't think the fields and trust would be a robust enough protection to avoid any future usage if a case was put forward for economic or other benefit of developing the existing site.
Okay. Mr Martin, do you have a view on that legally, how that stands?
I'm afraid, Madam, I'm not familiar with the fields in trust principle, but I can imagine an agreement between a local authority and a third party, in this case Sport Scotland or whoever it might be, which would in good faith, as it were, dedicate the land for a particular purpose for a particular time. I think all I would say is that that would not bring that arrangement within any formal statutory or otherwise legal context. For example, it wouldn't be the equivalent of inalienable common good. It wouldn't be the equivalent of some other form of land burdened by a title condition, which of course is much more difficult now given the change in the legislation. All I would say is that it would be a private agreement between two parties, no doubt in good faith, but the consequences of it, as I think Alison Connolly has indicated, might be unpredictable. With respect, I would certainly want to know more about the details of it if it were to be something that was of a significant factor in your consideration.
Okay, thank you very much. Alison, do you have a further question?
Something that you've already touched on this morning, both in your opening submission and in earlier questions. The Council's assertion is that the park is not well used and mainly used for dog walking and walking. However, that rests on an audit carried out in 2009 over a 10-day period, I think. Can PPAG give us some more information really on the uses to which the park has been put in recent years and what your reasons are for the view that the Council's audit wasn't fit for purpose?
I'll take that question. We challenged the council's audit of the usage of the park at the time, and we have challenged it since. I can't understand some of the phrases that have been used in there. For instance, they say that the pitches were only used in August and September, the football pitches, and yet from bookings that Edinburgh Leisure took, they say that from, say, September 2010 to May 2011, there was a team that used it in the East Region Youth FA, used it 24 times. 2 other teams played in the Fair Play League and used it on a fortnightly basis. There was training there every Tuesday evening. There was a training light on the pavilion. There was also, apart from that, other social events held on the park. Certainly the football teams had an annual day where the people came along, celebrated the football team, and various other events took place in the park, including running. And it's just, in some respects as well, the usage of the park was not compared with other parks in Edinburgh. You have a snapshot of Portobello-Park. How does that compare on the same days with the Meadows, the Links, Leith Links, Inverleith Park? I'm not suggesting that any of those parks should be built on at all. What I'm saying, though, is that you have got no control to compare the usage of Portobello-Park with any other park in Edinburgh or in Scotland.
Thank you.
So, Jennifer Peters. Sorry, just trying to get your microphone on.
Yep, there are no facilities at all on the park. There is one bench and the grass is rarely cut. I mean, people are not encouraged to use the park. If, for example, there was a swing park put on it, then we would see the usage go up. If there were more benches, if there were picnic tables. You know, any park in Edinburgh, if you remove all the facilities and you allow the grass to grow, inevitably the usage will dip. And it's simply not acceptable for the council, who are responsible for maintaining the park, to say that it's in a poor state and no one uses it. It is in that position because of City of Edinburgh Council.
Ms Peters, you mentioned something called Party on the Park. Was that a regular community event?
No, it's something that we would like to be a regular community event. I mean, there have been a few events on the park, but this one was quite recent. Around 200 people turned up to the event, and on that specific day there was an event in Leith that was cancelled due to poor weather, so it wasn't even a nice day with sunny weather, but clearly there's an appetite for park events.
Thank you. And finally, from my point of view, the council clarified that for the avoidance of doubt, the goalposts and the digging up in relation to the architectural, do I mean architectural? No, archaeological dig, was in 2011 and not 2009, so it didn't therefore inform the audit. Does that in any way change your view on the issue?
No, I mean, the park has still been neglected for some time. The grass is seldom cut and there are no benches, there are no facilities.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. James, do you have a final question?
Yes, this is on the golf course. You've argued in your written evidence that the council's plan to build a school in the park is part of a larger plan to redevelop the larger surrounding area, including the golf course. You mentioned that earlier on. You also argue that the siting of the school will lead to pupils crossing the golf course, thus damaging it, and that the golf course will close. However, the council has indicated that it's granted the golf course to the North Field and Trust status, and has also explained there's no likelihood of pupils crossing the golf course as there is no entrance on the north side. Can you indicate what impact the council's comments mentioned in its oral evidence have in the argument that the council wishes to develop a larger area than only the park? Alison.
I think it comes from our concern over the way this has been handled throughout the years. We've seen the council changing their mind a number of times about a number of important aspects to this plan, and it's made us a little bit anxious and cynical, perhaps, about the underlying motives. Because initially the decision was to develop the whole area. Initially the decision was to provide replacement space. But as we've, I think, explained this morning, there hasn't been a consistency throughout the process. Things keep changing. And we do see the future of the golf course as being compromised by its location right next to a high school.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any further questions? Okay, is there anything that the witnesses would like to add that they might not have been asked this morning? If they've any future, Mr. Martin?
I wonder, Madam, if I might just be permitted to say one thing. The issue of whether or not the council has maintained the park and what part that might play in its use and the record of its use in the survey. All that I would say is, and it is to confirm what Mr. Hawking said earlier, there is clear legal authority that where land is common good land, the authority has a duty, if I quote, the magistrates, given that it was a Victorian case, the magistrates were bound to see that it was kept in such order as to be suitable for these purposes. If it had been allowed to become unfit for these uses, that only shows that to that extent the duty of the magistrates has been neglected. So the fact is that it's part of the status of common good land that the authority has a duty to look after it for the benefit of the community. And I may not comment about the survey or whatever it may be, but the fact is, if this committee felt that there had been a degree of neglect here, then actually that might be said to be a breach of the Council's duty. And I should say that passage is actually referred to in paragraph 26 of Lady Peyton's opinion in the Court of Session case last year, a quote from 1879.
Thank you very much. Alison?
I'd like to add that the open space survey also made reference to the fact that the park was neglected and there was a lack of maintenance, specifically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hawkins.
And just last comment about the green space, and that is that during the planning process, the council admitted that this would be a worsening effect on its own green space standards by the loss of the park, because of it being a city park and the size of it. So that is something that, again, that mitigates against replacing the existing school site as green space. And that often what has happened as well is that people wish to redraw boundaries to compare the amount of green space that will be lost. Taking Portobello, it's 25% of the green space will be lost. Taking a wider area, the catchment area, maybe it's less. Taking Arthur's Seat in, it's even less. So it's where you draw the boundary. What we've been saying consistently is looking at Portobello. And this green space is under increasing pressure. Already the council is looking at 1,200 more houses in the green belt between Edinburgh and Musselburgh. All around us, we're losing green space, both in the green belt and in urban areas. And I think that the issue of where we use land, how we use it, is very important, but that we have to preserve, we have to recognise the full health benefits of open space, and the size of it has an effect on that.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further comments, thank you very much for your time this morning. All committee members appreciate that. And I'll now suspend briefly in order to change over witnesses. Thank you. Thank you. We'll now begin our second evidence session. I would invite witnesses to introduce themselves, please.
My name is Sean Waters. I've lived in Portobello for 9 years. I've got a daughter who's just started in S1 at Portobello High School and another in P6 at Tower Bank. I've been involved with Portobello for a new school for 7.5 years, and I've been the sort of nominal chair for the last 5 years, maybe.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. My name's Tom Ballantyne. I'm the chair of Portobello High School Parent Council. I've lived in Portobello for 19 years, and I've been involved in PFANS pretty much since it started. I'm the parent of 2 children at Portobello High School. I'm really here and able to tell you about the building as it is now, which is effectively to tell you that Portobello is a good school, but it's a good school in spite of its building. It's at the end of its ability to function to a tolerable level in this school building. It's on a site that's too small, and it has inadequate sports and other facilities. So Portobello High School is a fantastic institution in a building that's in a pretty terrible state and on a bad site. And the reason I joined PFANS was because I saw a wonderful opportunity for a state-of-the-art school in green space at the heart of the community with sports and other facilities for 1,400 young people and the wider community. Every school day, those facilities would be available to the school pupils, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions you have about what this school might offer our community.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rosemary Moffat. I live 2 minutes walk from Portobello-Park, and I have no school-aged children. I only became involved in this issue 18 months ago due to the successful PPAG appeal. I became involved because I was angry at the outcome of the appeal. I know that the park lies empty 99% of the time, and it's used only by dog walkers. I'm happy to answer any questions, explain the canvassing methods that we did. We canvassed the local community, Christians and Magdalenes, which is the communities I come from, and I'm happy to answer any questions with regards to how it was canvassed, responses from the local communities bordering the park. I felt it was important to get their views here today.
Thank you very much. Do you have an opening statement? And if you could keep that to 10 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to the committee for inviting us here today. We very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about this issue. We don't wish to encroach on time for questions, so I'll be brief. The core issue at the heart of this, the underlying reason we're all here today, is Portobello High School. Portobello High School is a great school in a deficient building on an inadequate site. The need for a new school is not in question. Everyone agrees it's urgently needed and long overdue. There's also no doubt about local feeling. The huge response to the private bill consultation demonstrated that the local community is overwhelmingly in favour of the school being built on Portobello-Park. It is by far the best possible site. We're in the unusual situation of having gone through an exhaustive process going back almost 8 years of public consultations, statutory educational consultations, prioritisation exercises, pre-planning consultations, planning processes, to have a great new school fully designed, consented and tendered, with a contractor ready to start building, but the school can't be built. And that appears to be down to a peculiar and presumably unintended quirk of the current law. It is possible to sell inalienable common good land, to dispose of it, but there is no legal mechanism to change its use, regardless of the merits, regardless of public benefit, regardless of public support. We're here because we want the school that our young people need, built where the community wants to see it. What's proposed offers the best outcome all round. We get a great new school on a site large enough to accommodate all the necessary facilities. We turn an underused space into a valued community asset. We'd get 2 freely accessible all-weather pitches that would sustain far more use than the grass pitches that were there before. Yes, we would lose some green space, but improved paths would make the remaining park and golf course more accessible. People would still be able to exercise, to enjoy the trees, the wildlife, the views. We'd also get a new park on the existing site, keeping the loss of open space to a minimum. And by relocating the school, we'd free up space for St John's Primary to expand, because St John's Primary is also on a grossly undersized site and is also in need of replacement. The land would continue to be common good, but used for education. The common good exists for the benefit of a community. The school on the park is in the best interests of our community, and this private bill is the means to achieve that. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. If I can just begin, just to get some background about PFANs. How long has it been established for, and what is the membership? Specifically, what proportion of the membership is made up of parents who have pupils at the existing school?
Well, with PFANs, the first tentative suggestions of possibly building the school in the park were floated just at the end of 2005. And they sort of really came into public consciousness early 2006. And although the details were very sketchy, there was very quickly an organisation against the proposals. And we really sort of formed at that time to say, hang on, we want to hear more. The school's important. Yeah, this is sketchy, it's tentative, but the school's important. We need to know more. We've always been a fairly loose organisation. Numbers come and go. We've got a Facebook page with 2,500 likes. We've got an email distribution list of a couple of hundred. We had, well, I think we've got 1,800 people have now signed that letter that we submitted to you. So it's loose, and we don't have membership details, but it's a wide range of people. There's people who are no kids. There's people that would see some benefit. My kids are going to the school. There's lots of people whose kids have grown up and gone through, and they got involved because they know how poor the school is. So it's a very broad mix of local people.
So obviously, as you said, you don't know the makeup of that membership at the moment. Is there a way of knowing that information, or would you be able to gather that information?
No, but we're not as formal as that. What we actually started up originally, it was to articulate the views of people who were in favour of the new school and the new school in the park. And for a lot of the process, it's not been clear where the balance of opinion is. We've had planning processes that got 681 responses. Now, for a planning process, that's not bad. There was 300 against, 381 in favour. But you look at the wider community, that's not huge numbers. And the reality is that people, they're aware of issues in the background, but they don't get involved. The thing that's changed is the actual consultation. And the consultation had a huge response. And I think that's the evidence that we do represent the sizable proportion of the community. Because the majority of the community, most people, are in favour of the school in the park.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ballantyne?
I think just as a slight gloss on that, I think it is a very loose kind of organisation, and people in a sense kind of do more or less depending on the time, the commitments, other things going on in their lives. So it is so fluid, I think it would be very difficult to give you an idea exactly of what the membership consists of just now. The Facebook likes is probably a good idea of how broad the kind of more direct support is, but different people within that grouping, if you like, will come forward at different times and do different things.
Okay, thank you very much. Just move to my colleague, Alison McInnes.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. There have been suggestions that the delay in building the new school is largely due to the Council's mismanagement of the issue. Do you agree with that view? And do you feel that there are steps the Council could have taken to ensure that a new school was built sooner?
I would say that it's clearly not an ideal situation to be in. So if you're looking at hindsight, then perhaps in 2008, when the common good issue was raised, maybe could have done something different. But to be fair, this park was bought in 1898, and the first time that anyone suggested it was common good was 2006. So for 108 years, no one thought it was common good, and it wasn't on the common good register. So when that claim was first made, it took a while for the council to go away and look at it as part of a wider look at common good within the city, and concluded it probably was. Now, actually, in 2008, we moved towards a prioritisation process because there was 5 schools identified that needed replacement, the Wave 3 schools. And actually, at that time, we lobbied the council to resolve the issue of, was this a problem? Because we were worried that we might be marked down on the prioritisation exercise because of this uncertainty. So we lobbied the council to resolve it, and what happened was they went to 2 QCs to get opinions, and the opinions they got back was they didn't need permission to go to court, they could build the school in the park. I assume, presumably in light of the North Lanarkshire and South Lanarkshire cases. Now, ultimately, that's transpired to be wrong, but I don't actually think it was that unreasonable for the council to having taken advice, to then follow that advice. So it's an unfortunate situation to be in, but I think the council have acted in good faith all along.
Thank you.
I mean, my only gloss on that would be that effectively, there was an outer house decision where effectively the council were successful on the basis of delay from the people opposing the school in the park, and they were also to be allowed to build. So it's clear that there was quite a lot of difficulty on the technical legal issue. And as Sean said, I think if you get legal advice telling you that you're okay to do something, it's understandable that you'll take the best advice available to you.
Thank you. You've spoken about your view that the school itself, a new school, is in itself a common good. What's your view of the argument that the loss of green space and its benefits to the community is not acceptable, as there are other possible alternative sites for the school?
Well, there are other possible sites for the school. They're inferior for a variety of reasons. And that was true of the exercise back in 2006. There were sites that weren't in council ownership, were too small, they were badly located, too expensive to develop. That's still largely true. I mean, sites have been looked at again and again. So it's not the case that this is the only possible site. It's the best site by far, and there are serious deficiencies with alternatives. In terms of the loss of green space, come back to local people know Portobello-Park and how it's used, and it is mainly used. It was football pitches that were pretty poor. I played on them once and we abandoned the game and went elsewhere because the pitches were that bad. So they weren't great pitches, they weren't hugely used. It's mainly used by walking and dog walking. And if you're looking at actual amenity and what functions the park has currently served, then with the new school you've got 2 floodlit all-weather pitches. It will take far more use than the grass pitches ever could. So you've preserved that amenity, and these pitches are going to be freely accessible and freely bookable to local people. So it's free. So you've got the football angle covered. And when it comes to walking, exercise, dog walking, there's going to be reduced green space, that's true. But if you put the paths in along the golf course, along the tree belts, where it's informal at the moment, there's no proper path. Access isn't great. But if you put the paths down both sides of the golf course, and you've got the area at the top around the school, you've still got the trees, you've still got the views, you still have amenity there. So if you set that against the benefits of the school on that site, I think it's pretty clear cut to me, and I think the majority of the local community agree.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that? What you're losing is, I think, effectively about half of a football pitch, half the size of a football pitch. What you're gaining is a fantastic school in a green space. So the school is next to a golf course. These children are important, and their needs to be educated somewhere that is the best possible place for them. So you're gaining that. I thought it was very interesting that the word was used by the PPAG representative to the effect that it was feasible to build a school elsewhere. We're not denying that it's feasible to build a school elsewhere. What we're saying is the best option by far is the site at Portobello-Park, and that is why the community has rallied round so strongly to say that this is the option they want to go with.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. We heard this morning from PPAG that they believed that this should be pursued as a public bill. Can you confirm whether or not PFANS is in favour of the option of pursuing this private bill process?
I'd say that, well, it's been raised in other evidence, and Andrew Ferguson made reference to community empowerment and renewable, and the original consultation on that did raise issues of common good and the governance of common good, but that's hugely uncertain about the timescale for that, whether that will be taken forward, and what will happen. I think, though, that common good law will have to be looked at. You read the opinions that have already been submitted. You've had Andrew Ferguson describe the current situation as somewhat illogical. Jerry Moynihan, QC, has described it as odd, and Professor Rennie's described it as bizarre. So if it's peculiar, odd, bizarre, you know, there's an underlying problem there, clearly. But from our point of view, so we don't see this as some sacred principle of law that you cannot appropriate. It's a quirk. if you can dispose of it, if there's public benefit, if it's justifiable, it's not an unfettered right to do something, it seems incredible that you can't appropriate it if there is sufficient merit. But for us, we've got a school that's fully designed, fully consented, could be built. The community wants it. It could be built in 20 months. So that's sitting there. And the idea that we'll wait for 3-4 years for an uncertain resolution to common good in general, it strikes me as bizarre.
Okay. That was one of the alternative approaches that the Council ought to have been able to said that it considered, and it talks about it in its memorandum. There were some other alternatives that they could have pursued. Did you think that there was adequate focus to give an explanation of those alternatives and the reasons why they weren't being taken forward by the Council during the consultation, you know, at the public meeting and in their consultation material?
Generally speaking, yes. I think because as soon as the appeal came in, we were pressuring the council to, well, what can you do? Are there options? And we were looking at it too, and taking advice from people within our group who had legal backgrounds and all that. And it quickly became fairly apparent that the private bill was pretty much the only option. The others were just not realistic, not practical. And certainly the consultation material and the information, there was a huge amount of information put out. It was available. People were aware of the issues. They were informed. There was a huge level of engagement with local people. I mean, the response to the consultation is astonishing for what is a local issue. So I think that demonstrates that people were engaged and there was plenty of information out there.
Thank you.
Can I just add,
Mr. Ballantyne.
Can I just add to that you've got to remember, I'm not sure which aspects of the consultation you're talking about, but you've got to remember this issue goes back to 2006, so that people, for instance, there was an education look at which were the available sites. They went through all the sites. There was a tremendous amount of research done into what would be the best possible sites for a school and how different sites would work. That process of investigation really went on in different ways right up until the last consultation on this question of the private bill. So people within the community have been very engaged with this issue, really going way back to 2006.
I understand that many people in the community will have been very engaged with it from the start. Our focus has to be on the formal consultation part relating to the private bill. So do you think the Council relied heavily on what had gone before, or do you think the consultation at the time of the private bill properly explained all of the alternatives situations?
In a word, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Well, can I just expand on that? What people were being asked was, would they agree to the school being built on this particular site? Would they agree to a change in the use of the park? That was the question they were being asked. And on the leaflet sent out to them, there was the opportunity to look at information going back into alternative sites. There was a website that people could look at on that as well. So the critical question for the people of the community was, do we believe it would be better to change the use of this park to be the place for the new school, or to leave it as a park? And that was what they voted overwhelmingly for, because they understood the benefit it would give the community.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll now move to Fiona MacLeod. Thanks.
Good morning. Can I home in a bit on the consultation process, the mechanics of it? PPAG have told us that they have concerns about the notification process that went through. And so I was wanting to gather your experience of the notification process in the local area. Were there any difficulties experienced in certain residential areas regarding the consultation process? And in answering it, I'd also like to pick up on something that Rosemary Moffat said about doing your own consultation. I think it would be interesting to hear why you felt the need to do that.
Well, I'll just say, I'll pass to Rosemary, because she was quite heavily involved in the consultation. It's documented that there was a problem with the initial delivery of leaflets. I didn't get the first leaflet. But it's also true there was a huge amount going on. There was leaflets in the libraries, there was lots of publicity, there was stories in the evening news, STV, so there was a lot of publicity in general. And alongside the council doing its thing to engage people and get responses, we were doing that, and the Portobello-Park Action Group were doing that. We were going door to door, we were setting up stalls, we were going to supermarkets. PPAG were knocking on doors, handing out leaflets, going to supermarkets as well. The idea that local residents were unaware of the consultation is not credible. It's not remotely credible. There was glossy colour leaflets encouraging people to support Build It on Baileyfield that went out to, from what we could tell, thousands of households. So there was an active campaign also to get people to engage in the consultation against the private bill. So there was a huge amount of publicity and a huge amount of information out there, and people being informed by various parties, us, PPAG and the Council, what was going on and what was happening, and putting their own views on it. But I'll pass to Rosemary to talk about the consultation itself.
Hello again. Yes, we found basically the same as what Sean was saying. We concentrated purely on the two housing schemes that actually border Portobello-Park. You know, so these are the people that are most affected by the private bill. Now we canvassed them. We found that the majority of the people all knew exactly what was going on, because it had been a saga that had been going on for many years. Also, there was umpteen newspaper reports that was giving you information on the private bill. It was telling you about the public meetings. When we were actually going round the doors, residents were actually telling us that we were an hour behind PPAG going round the door. And it actually got to the stage that some people were saying to us, are you for the school or against the school? Because there was a bit of confusion, because both groups were going round at the same time, but we never bumped into each other. We also, residents were happy to speak with us, give us, their views on the matter. They were informing us, that PPAG were canvassing in the area, and that they were also being asked to sign a petition along with, the response form. Most people already knew about it. They had newspaper articles. We did carry spare leaflets with us for any households that hadn't received leaflets. But we found that the majority of people did know about it. We did run a callback diary that if we didn't get doors answered, we took a note of the address and we would call back at a later time, because we actually wanted to reach the hard-to-reach groups. We wanted to make contact with it and get the views of the elderly residents, households with no internet access. So we actually wanted to cover every area. So we covered every street, knocked every door, and made sure that we spoke to the vast majority of the community that we could.
I've lived in Portobello for 19 years, and I've never known any other issue brings so many people to public meetings, to community council meetings, to school meetings. The community were very, very, very engaged with this issue and knew what was going on.
Right. Can I just follow up a couple of the comments you made? Because the private bill process, as a committee, we've got to satisfy ourselves that the promoter undertook a consultation process that was open, accessible, etc. So two questions specifically. Mr Waters, you said that you didn't receive the consultation from the council.
Not the first leaflet
drop. You got it in the second?
Yes.
And as you, as a local resident, were satisfied that you had been clearly informed, given the consultation process by the council in an adequate time frame?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. Can I then turn to Ms Moffat? And you talked about you took leaflets to the doors so that when folks said they hadn't received something, you had them. Were you taking the council's consultation?
It was a council consultation, yes. What actually happened was, when the consultation started on the 3rd of December, we were aware that paperwork was getting posted out to all the households, but we wanted to get a move on with it, so we actually went to the library and we picked up some of the information leaflets and some of the forms so that we could start the consultation process as soon as possible. We knew we were going to have the Christmas break and etc. So we were keen to get started. But by going round the doors, I live in that area, and I certainly got my leaflets prior to Christmas, and I know that my neighbours and friends got their leaflets prior to Christmas. I know of people in the Christians who actually got leaflets prior to Christmas with a second lot after Christmas. So the whole area was leafleted, and I'm talking about the 2 schemes bordering the park. They were leafleted before Christmas and after Christmas. There may have been the odd address who, you know, didn't get a leaflet, but we covered every door and we did not have people complaining about no leaflets. I think the initial hiccup was that we started as soon as the consultation opened, and the stuff was still in the post at that stage. And that may have been the problem with some of the PPAG households as well, because they were canvassing at the same time as us, which was roughly 2 days after the consultation started. Only we were going around with the leaflets and the consultation response papers because we had collected them from the library.
Right. Okay, thank you. Can I move on to the public meetings? We've been told that they were characterised as hostile. This morning, PPAG reiterated that in their evidence. But I asked them, was there anything the council could have done to lessen the hostility at these public meetings? And this morning they said that they didn't think that that would have been possible because of the heightened nature of everybody's public participation. So could you elaborate on that, if you think the council could have done anything to create a more positive atmosphere at these public meetings?
I think I'd characterise the public meetings as robust rather than hostile. There's been lots of meetings over the years. The one difference was with these meetings is that at both the meetings in the Town Hall and Meadowbank, and particularly Meadowbank, it was pretty clear that the actual public that turned up were overwhelmingly in favour of the school in the park. So, and when you had both PPAG and PFANs there, PPAG had less support in the room. Whether that translates into hostility, I'm not convinced. I think the idea that there's a lot of division, discord and hostility within the community is exaggerated. The community is not that divided, regardless of where people sit on the issue. I have friends, acquaintances that I like and respect who are against the school in the park. I'm far more in favour, but I do have friends. It's not that big a problem. What the issue is that actually it's gone on for 8 years. And if you get the core people who've been involved for 8 years, there's a core people on either side of a few dozen who've been arguing with each other for 8 years and winding each other up in the letters pages of the evening news. So within a couple of dozen people on either side of PPAG and PFANs, it's fair to say there's a little bit of friction. But the wider communities, that's not a characterisation of the wider community. It's not divided. There's not that much discord. People disagree, but it's a school. It's not the issue it's made out to be.
I was at both public meetings, and I think the critical thing to understand is they were, I thought, extremely well managed meetings. As far as I'm aware, all questions were taken. There were a lot of questions that were against the school being built in the park, and they were all answered. I thought the officials answering the questions conducted themselves in a very civil and patient way. There wasn't any difficulty around that. So if you're going to have a public meeting about something people disagree on, you're bound to have some fairly robust discussion. That was really as far as it went, as far as I was concerned. And as I say, I think both the person chairing the meeting managed it in a very balanced way, and I thought the officials answered in a very fair way.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. And now to my colleague, James Donnan.
Thank you very much. Good morning. If the school is built in the park, there are claims that the compensatory green space being proposed by the council would only be a third of the area of Portobello-Park. What are your views on this claim?
Well, it's sort of playing with figures almost. There's the area of Portobello-Park, excluding the golf course, because originally the whole thing was Portobello-Park, is about 6.4 hectares. So that's roughly what it is. If you build the school campus and the car park is 2.8 hectares, about 40%. And then you've got the 2 pitches, the all-weather pitches that are accessible. They're 1.6 hectares, 1.4, something like that. They're about 25%. So there's 35% of Portobello-Park that remains as public space, effectively. You've still got the trees, there's a sort of civic square bit in front of the school, and there's a particular area of grass that's about 0.6 hectares. So in terms of the actual school, you're losing 2.8 hectares. The proposed park on the existing site would be 2.2 or something like that. So you're looking at a net loss 0.4, 0.6 hectares. It's not a huge amount. You have to look at, okay, in terms of accessibility and use, okay, it's a different location. It's close to Figget Park. How does that affect communities around the park who are most likely to use it as it is? Well, Portobello-Park's not hugely used by the local community. There's other places that people use, the Bingham Park. Kids tend to play in Brunston Primary School grounds. That's the sort of recognised safe play area. So in terms of amenity, I think these proposals are a huge improvement. I think they improve that area. It makes it more useful for the community, both with the pitches and the improved paths, and we get a new park on the existing site with an expanded St John's. Now, what form that park takes, hopefully that will be informed by the community to see what kind of space they need. But I think overall, loss of some green space is always going to be regrettable. But there are huge benefits to this. There's huge benefits to these proposals. There's huge benefits with this school on that location. So it's regrettable, but I'm fully in favour of the school going on the park.
Mr. Ballantyne,
it would be helpful to give a little comment about the issue of usage, because it's something that I feel the community feels quite strongly about. And certainly, that area of land is generally recognised as not being very well used. And when this first came to be an issue, back in 2006, I took the trouble to go to speak to the leisure manager who managed the parks. I still got the email from her saying what level of usage there was of the football fields there. And what she said was that effectively there were 180 games throughout the year. So what she says is it was over a 36-week season, there were 180 games. Now, just to give you a context for that.
Sorry, could I clarify? No, the season, the length of the season?
The season was from August to April.
Right, okay.
That's 2006. Now, just to compare, if you imagine those two pitches being used by a school with 1,400 pupils every school day and being available to the community during the evenings and at weekends, I wouldn't think it was unrealistic to say that they would be used, say, 5 times a day for each pitch, so 10 times a day. So within about, 20 days, you've used that area for the community more than you do in the whole year at present for football. So in terms of amenity and usage, there is no doubt in my mind that the benefit, the clear benefit will be if the school is there with the pitches available to the school and the community.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, what's your view on the plan to establish the new green space at the site of the existing school?
Well, the one thing, the park on the existing site, very much in favour. Also, the fact that it allows St John's to expand, because St John's site is 0.6 and it should be 1.4, and it's overcrowded for the site it's on. I think in terms of one of the things, because it was considered before and it was discounted because of its proximity to Figget Park. And Figget Park is the largest park in the local area. It's more than double the size of Portobello-Park. But it depends what form that park takes. There's different types of parks. You could have a real asset for the community. I think it would have to be different from Figget Park. There's no point recreating the same kind of park. But if you've got a sizable park there and it's got fields and trust status, I think it can only benefit.
Okay, Mr. Ballantyne, do you have a view on this?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Right, it was about your view on the plan to establish a new green space at the site of the existing school. And as Mr. Waters just said, it's a very close proximity to Figget Park.
I don't have a strong view. I just know that the park, as it is not well used in my understanding and what I've seen going past there. And therefore, I've no reason to believe that any new park would be any less well used.
Okay, right, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to take you on to the criticisms that the school community appears to have had a disproportionate opportunity to promote the case for a positive response to the council submission process, consultation process. For example, at a pre-Christmas event and parent forum consultations. Do you have any comments on this?
Certainly. I've been on Tower Bank Parent Council, and we put out information, leaflets and notices to people, not encouraging them to respond in any particular way, but informing people about the consultation. And towards the end of the consultation, on 2 occasions, we set up a stall in Tower Bank Playground. There was 3 of us from the school council. We had the official council leaflets, we had the little official green postcard thing that the council produced, and we had official consultation responses. And again, it was simply an opportunity for people to respond however they wished, didn't seek to influence what people did. So there was that, but at the same time, we were letting people know the consultation was going, we were publicising it, and they could respond how they wished. We were going around doors, PPAG were going around doors, tapping on doors, giving out leaflets, going to supermarkets. We were both promoting this as heavily as possible. So, and also, if you look at the figures, you get 10,000 responses. That's far, far more than the school community of Portobello High School and the Costa Primary. That's far more. You know, if you look at the actual wards, there's a breakdown by intermediate geographies in the council report. You look at Portobello, Joppa, they're defined, you're looking at a response of like 22% of the entire population. The entire population. Now, 22% might not be great in a general election, but in a consultation, I mean, most consultations get a few hundred. I mean, that's a huge level of response across the community.
Okay. Mr. Ballantyne.
Waiting for yeah, I mean, my only gloss on that would be that there was probably a disproportionate desire to communicate on this issue from the school community, but that's understandable because it's the young people of Portobello who are going to be affected. So I think it's fair to say that the school community would be wanting to get involved, but you would expect that in any consultation, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Ballantyne, you spoke about the usage of the park just in the previous answers, but I was more interested in the apparent neglect of the park that we spoke about earlier, and obviously we've heard in evidence. So I'm just wondering if you agree that there's been neglect of the park, and if so, where you think that neglect of the park has come from, be it the council or others?
I think that, well, essentially in the past there were 2 football pitches there. I think what happened was that they were then preparing for the change of use of the area to the school before and doing an archaeological dig. This is me talking slightly off the top of my head, so that it was sort of dug up for that. I couldn't say, as my, I mean, I would be just giving you anecdote. I don't really know what it looks like at the moment. I think what I would reiterate is that the reason I think it's interesting what the situation was in 2006 is because that was when there were 2 football pitches there. There's no reason why things should have changed dramatically since then, and it was not used very much at that time.
I'll go to you, Mr Waters, but I want to clarify because I didn't pick that up. You don't know what the park is like now. Is that what you said, sorry?
Well, I go past the park.
Okay.
And I think the question would be whether the grass is cut. And I think it is
No,
cut.
that's right. It's just that I didn't catch that. So
and I couldn't tell you really much more than, for instance, I couldn't tell you whether the football posts are up or anything like that.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Waters.
Well, just to put it in the context, what happened was once they got planning permission and it was tendered, they were moving towards building on the park. So at that point, they do an archaeological dig. So that sort of tore up the football pitches, etc. And ever since then, they've been hoping to start building on the park as soon as possible. They were hoping to win the case in the Outer House, which they did. They were hoping there wouldn't be an appeal. Then there was an appeal and they went for that. So actually, the whole time they've been waiting to build on the park. So as they were waiting to build on the park, maintenance of the park wasn't a huge priority because they were going to start building on it. That's changed more recently because it was going to be a more protracted process. They did some remedial works. I mean, the park was always usable. I've walked across it many a time the last few years as a shortcut. It's always been usable, but it's never been that widely used. In terms of the pitches were always poor. There's a clarification should make in the usage survey that was produced, and that was done in the summer because it was trying to survey casual use. It made an estimate of what level of use the pitches could sustain. It didn't put in actual figures. And it was saying that the pitches, because they were poor, could sustain 3 games a week. That's all they could sustain. That's far, far more than the actual use. Right? As Tom said, that the Edinburgh Leisure confirmed about 180 lets per week, per year. There's actually 4 pitches. There's 2 full-size and 2 7-a-side pitches, or there were there. If you've got 4 pitches being used 3 times a week over a season that's 40 weeks long, you're pushing 500 possible lets. And the actual usage was 180. So even then, the pitches were used far less than they could have been because they weren't very good. And that's the reality of what the park was like.
Okay, thank you. Ms Moffat.
As I've already said, I live minutes from the park, so I see on a daily basis what goes on in the park. Now, to the local community, being Christians and Magdalenes at least, they don't have a problem with the park for the simple reason neither schemes actually use it. There is an abundance of green space in both areas. Residents of Magdalene in particular actually have, the children have the grounds of Brunston Primary School to one side of the scheme. Behind the scheme there are, it's the Magdalene Glen. To the opposite, to the opposite side of the school there is Jewel Park. And over the road there is Portobello-Park. And even for the people in the Christians, to the side of them, they have Joppa Park. They have the safe play area at Brunston Primary School, which is just over the road from them. They would have the new sports pitches on Portobello-Park, if the school was to go there. They also have a big grassy area that actually runs the length of the whole scheme right at the back of their houses. You wouldn't actually know about it unless you actually lived in the scheme. It's at the back of the houses, runs the whole length of the scheme from top to bottom. So there is actually quite a lot of green space and playing area that actually surrounds Christians and Magdalene. So any problems with the park and with it not being maintained, to be honest, is not a problem unless you have a dog, because no one else is paying attention to it. The park has lain empty the majority of the time, and I see it day in, day out, and I have seen it for years and years, even before the dig. It was never a well-used park. Yes, there was a few football games now and again. There was the occasional bit of training. I grew up with 2 brothers, complained constantly about Portobello-Park for the simple reason it was on a slope. And the minute they tried to pass the ball to each other, it went somewhere else. The amount of fights it caused because the ball didn't go where it was supposed to go because of the slope. So it's not like other parks that are loved. It's not a loved park, and it never has been for a long, long time.
Okay, thank you. Mr Ballantyne.
Sorry, I went up.
The ball doesn't go where I want it to go, incidentally, for different reasons. But yeah, just to give you a context for this, at the moment, Portobello High School has to bus pupils off-site to get their PE. So they get for every hour, they get, say, 20-25 minutes of PE. Because it takes them, when they have to go to the bus, they have to get on the bus, they have to travel, they get out, and all the rest of it. So they lose all their PE time. There's one 5-a-side pitch at the school at the moment. So when you're thinking about this, you should understand that if we're talking about tackling obesity, if we're talking about health, this is a huge opportunity for our community to look at these things, to give better access to sport for all those thousands of young people and the community.
Okay, thank you. Do the members have further questions? Okay, does the witnesses have anything further they wish to add that they might not have been asked? Ms Moffat?
A bit regarding, it was just a few of the comments that I remember actual people saying. Again, we're talking about the area surrounding the park. It was when we were doing the canvassing and we were talking to people on the door, people actually felt that the park was a wasted area and they wanted a better use for common good land. And there was quite a few people actually said, what better common good can you get than the common good, of a school or what the local community wants. Other comments that were fed back to us, there was a few elderly residents who wanted the community children to have the use of the park, as opposed to the dog walkers having the use of the park. Many residents were happy with the school proposal, which is why there is a high level of support from the areas immediately bordering the park. They're hoping to get the sports pitches on the park because it will get the youths off the street and into the park using the sports pitches evenings and weekends. And a lot of the elderly residents were actually quite happy that they were going to have a swimming pool on their doorstep where they could go to, you know, down to the school evenings and weekends and actually access the school swimming pool. Because at the moment they cannot get a bus directly to Portobello, they need to take 2 buses or walk. You know, so they're over the moon at the thought of getting a school swimming pool on their doorstep. And there were a few, there were a minority who objected to the private bill, to be totally honest. And the reasons being that they were objecting was it would be more litter in the street. It would be noisy children passing their doors. There would be children attending the local shops at lunchtime, could cause traffic congestion. But there was only one person throughout all the people that I actually spoke to between the 2 housing schemes, only one person mentioned a loss of green space. It was never mentioned at any other household, and we covered approximately 900 households in Magdalene and 200 and odd in Christians, and there was only one mention of losing green space. That is what the green space means to these 2 housing estates. They don't use it, it's not a loss to them. But what they could have is a loss, you know.
Okay, thank you. Any additional, Mr. Walters?
Just briefly. Oh, go. It was just, I mean, this has gone on, well, I've been involved 7.5 years in this. It's been debated and discussed to death. The sheer number of, I counted 107 articles in the Edinburgh Evening News since January 2006 on this issue, and that's not counting the multiple letters. So it's been argued about, it's been discussed, people have been informed, people have been engaged, people understand the issues, and the majority of people see this as a huge opportunity. We need a new school. The existing school is dreadful. It's a great school in an awful building on an inadequate site, a site that was always inadequate from the time it was built, which is why it's a 9-storey tower block. So there's a great opportunity here to have a great school set within parkland next to the golf course. You've got all weather pitches and we get a new park. It's also the quickest possible route to a new school and by far the cheapest. You're looking at £5.9 to £6.7 million more for the alternatives identified. That's the cost of a primary school. So there are a huge amount of positives behind this, and that's why the community are broadly in favour. And really, if we can get this through and get that school built, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Valentine?
I don't think I can add anything to that beyond the fact that it is this idea of a fantastic opportunity. I think when we've spoken to people about this before we came here today, it was really, we wanted to communicate the positives about the opportunity in terms of facilities within the school, gym hall, dance areas, music, drama, all these things going on within the school, and outside you've got the sports facilities. So I think it is important for both the Scottish Parliament and our community to show that we value our young people, we value their education, and it's not just a question of going to the most feasible option for the new school, it's going to the best option, and this is the best option.
Okay, thank you very much for your time this morning. That concludes the public session. We now move on to private. Thank you.